Vanessa needs something to build her future with. My father said it like he was announcing a promotion. We were still sitting in Grandpa Arthur's attorney's conference room, less than an hour after leaving the cemetery. My mother sat beside him with one hand resting proudly on my sister's arm. Vanessa had a thick leather folder in front of her. I had nothing. Dad looked around the table, almost enjoying the attention. Your mother and I have decided Vanessa will receive $10 million from the family investment account. Vanessa's mouth parted. 10 million? Mom squeezed her hand. You deserve a real start. I waited. 1 second. 2, then 5. Nobody said my name. Finally, I looked at my father. And me? His expression barely changed. You've always wanted to prove you can do everything yourself, Faith. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Dad continued. Vanessa needs support. You don't. So go earn your own. The room went still. I was 29 years old. I had worked since college, paid my own rent, built my career without asking my parents for help, and spent the last few years driving Grandpa to appointments whenever Dad was too busy. And somehow all of that had just become the reason I deserved nothing. Mom leaned forward. You should take it as a compliment. We know you're independent. I stared at her. So Vanessa gets 10 million because she needs help, and I get nothing because I learned how to survive without it. Don't make this ugly, Dad said. Vanessa looked at me quickly. Faith, I didn't know they were going to announce it like this. I believed her. That almost made it worse. I turned back to Dad. There was only one question that mattered. Did Grandpa know? Dad answered immediately. Yes. Something inside me dropped. The money suddenly meant almost nothing. Grandpa had been the one person in the family who never treated my independence like rebellion. When my father laughed at my first salary and asked why I was wasting time at a small consulting firm, Grandpa had said, starting small teaches you which part of success is actually yours. When his eyesight got worse, I was the one who drove him across town to appointments. Sometimes we sat in the car afterward with coffee while he asked about my work, not my salary. My work, what I was learning, what decisions I regretted, whether I liked the person I was becoming. If he had known my parents planned to give Vanessa $10 million and tell me to fend for myself, and he had approved it, then maybe I had misunderstood everything. Dad mistook my silence for jealousy. This is exactly why your grandfather trusted me to manage the family's financial future, he said. He understood that not every child needs the same thing. I pushed my chair back. Everyone looked at me. I glanced at Vanessa. Congratulations, Faith. No, really. It's not your fault. Then I looked directly at my father. You're right about one thing. His eyebrows lifted. I can earn my own. I reached for my coat. That was when Grandpa's attorney finally spoke. Faith, please sit down. I stopped. Samuel Price had represented my grandfather for more than 20 years. He had barely said a word since we entered the room. Dad waved dismissively. Samuel, there's no reason to drag this out. She's upset. Let her leave. Samuel looked at him. Richard, I think you're confused. My father's face tightened. About what? Samuel placed both hands on the table. We haven't read Arthur's will yet. Nobody moved. I slowly turned around. Dad frowned. What are you talking about? Samuel opened his briefcase. I allowed you to speak first because Arthur specifically instructed me to. Mom straightened. Arthur instructed you to let Richard announce our family arrangements. Samuel did not answer. Instead, he removed a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark wax. My breath caught before I even saw the writing. I knew that handwriting. Grandpa's. Samuel placed the envelope on the table. Across the front, in Arthur Bennett's unmistakable block letters, were the words, For Faith, to be opened only after Richard has declared his intentions. Dad's confidence disappeared. Mom stood halfway from her chair. What does that mean? Samuel looked at her calmly. It means Arthur wanted today to happen in a very specific order. My fingers went cold. Vanessa leaned toward the envelope. Grandpa knew Dad was going to give me the 10 million. Samuel said nothing. Dad stepped toward the table. Give me that. Samuel pulled the envelope back. No, that single word changed the room. For as long as I could remember, my father had been the person everyone obeyed when money was involved. Now Grandpa's lawyer was looking at him like his authority ended at the edge of that table. Sit down, Richard. My father actually did. I returned slowly to my chair. The coat stayed in my hands. 5 minutes earlier, I had believed Grandpa had watched my parents choose Vanessa over me and agreed with them. Now I was staring at proof that he had anticipated their decision before he died. I looked at his handwriting again. For Faith. After Richard has declared his intentions, Grandpa hadn't simply left me a message. He had set a trap for the truth, and as Samuel reached toward the seal, one question drowned out everything else in my mind. How could Grandpa have known exactly what my parents were going to do? Samuel's fingers touched the seal, but he didn't break it. Instead, he pulled another sheet of paper from his briefcase and placed it beside Grandpa's envelope. My father frowned. What now? Samuel adjusted his glasses. Arthur left procedural instructions. Before I open anything addressed to Faith, I'm required to confirm something for the record. Dad leaned back impatiently. Then confirm it? Samuel looked directly at him. You and Diane have chosen to give Vanessa the $10 million under your control, while providing nothing equivalent to Faith, correct? Dad's jaw tightened. We already covered this. I need a clear answer. Yes, Dad snapped. That is our decision. Samuel wrote something down. Mom stared at him. Why does that matter? Samuel capped his pen. We'll come back to that. That answer changed the atmosphere instantly. Dad looked irritated. Mom looked nervous. And I couldn't stop staring at the sentence Samuel had just written down. Our decision, not Grandpa's. Samuel announced a short recess before continuing. The moment I stepped into the hallway, Mom followed me. Faith. I kept walking. Faith, stop. I turned. She lowered her voice. Whatever happens when we go back in there, control yourself. I almost laughed. Control myself? You're making this look worse than it needs to. You mean I looked hurt when Dad announced in front of everyone that Vanessa gets $10 million and I should go earn my own? You are twisting it. How? Mom glanced toward the conference room door. Vanessa needs help establishing herself. You've spent years telling us how independent you are, and somehow being responsible became my punishment. It isn't punishment. Then what is it? Mom hesitated. I stepped closer. Why does Vanessa always get rewarded for needing you while I get punished for not needing you? Her expression hardened. Because Vanessa understands family. There it was. What does that mean? It means she stays close. She listens. She doesn't challenge your father every time he makes a decision. Suddenly, the $10 million made perfect sense. This had never been about who needed money. It was about who obeyed. So if I had agreed with Dad more, I'd be worth helping? That isn't what I said. It's exactly what you said. Mom folded her arms. You always have to turn everything into a fight. No. I'm finally asking the question everyone avoids. I paused. Did Grandpa really agree with cutting me out? Mom opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Just for a second, but I saw it. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. Mom, your father handled those conversations with Arthur. That's not what Dad said. She looked away. Before I could press further, Vanessa appeared at the end of the hallway. Faith. Mom immediately straightened. Vanessa, this doesn't concern you. Vanessa gave her a strange look. I think $10 million with my name attached makes it concern me. Mom walked back toward the conference room without answering. Vanessa waited until the door closed. Then she came closer. I swear I didn't know they were going to do that. I know. No, you don't understand. Dad told me months ago that after Grandpa died, he wanted to settle things permanently. I thought that meant both of us. My stomach tightened. Months ago, she nodded. I assumed Grandpa had arranged something separately for you. He didn't tell me anything. Vanessa looked toward the conference room. There's something else. What? A few months before Grandpa died, he asked me whether Dad had promised me the 10. I stared at her. The 10. Exactly those words. I didn't understand what he meant, so I told him Dad had mentioned helping me financially someday. Grandpa just nodded and changed the subject. That meant Grandpa knew, not vaguely. He knew the amount. Before I could answer, the conference room door opened. Dad stood there. What are you two discussing? Vanessa stiffened. Grandpa. Dad's expression changed. Vanessa, private financial matters are not something you discuss with Faith. I looked at him. Why not? Because this family has already had enough drama today. No, Dad. You announced $10 million in front of a room full of people. You made it public. Faith, and now I want Grandpa's instructions read exactly as he left them. Dad stepped toward me. This is still my family. I didn't move. And it was Grandpa's estate. We walked back into the conference room. Samuel looked up as I took my seat. I placed my coat beside me. I want everything Grandpa left concerning me read exactly as written. No private interpretation. No family settlement. Nothing filtered through my parents. Dad immediately objected. That is unnecessary. Samuel answered before I could. Faith is entitled to hear it. Dad's face hardened. For once, that ended the argument. Samuel picked up the cream-colored envelope. The room became completely silent. He slid one finger beneath the wax seal. Crack. Dad leaned forward. Samuel removed a handwritten letter, but then he reached deeper into his case and pulled out a second document. He placed it beside Grandpa's letter. I could only see the heading from where I sat. My father could see it too, and all the color seemed to drain from his face. Printed across the top were 5 words: Bennett Holdings, voting control transfer. Dad shot out of his chair. Give me that document. Samuel didn't move. For a moment, nobody else did either. My father had spent most of his adult life managing Bennett Holdings. At family dinners, business events, even Grandpa's birthday parties, he called it my company so often that everyone had stopped questioning the phrase. Now he was staring at the document on Samuel's desk, like 5 printed words had just threatened everything. I said, give it to me. Samuel calmly rested one hand over the page. No, Richard. Dad's voice rose. I'm the managing executive of Bennett Holdings. Anything involving voting control concerns me. It concerns you, Samuel replied. That doesn't mean it belongs to you. A financial advisor sitting near the window lowered his eyes. 2 relatives exchanged glances. Dad noticed. That made it worse. Sit down, Samuel said. I will not. Then I will suspend the reading until you do. Dad stared at him. Slowly he returned to his chair. It was the first time that day I saw the balance of power move away from my father. Samuel picked up Grandpa's handwritten letter. Arthur instructed me to read this portion before discussing the corporate documents. Dad folded his arms. Samuel began. Grandpa explained that during his final years, he had become increasingly concerned by something Dad repeatedly said about me. Faith could take care of herself. At first, Grandpa had considered it praise. Then he realized Dad was using my independence differently. Whenever Vanessa needed money, my parents called it support. Whenever I didn't need money, they treated that as proof I should receive less. Samuel continued reading Grandpa's words. Financial responsibility should never become a punishment. My throat tightened. Dad interrupted immediately. This is ridiculous. Samuel stopped. Dad pointed toward the letter. My father was elderly. His health was declining. Anyone who spent time with him near the end knows that. My chair scraped against the floor as I shifted toward him. You told me 10 minutes ago Grandpa completely understood and approved your decision. Dad looked at me. That's different. How? He didn't answer. Samuel did. Arthur anticipated that objection too. He opened another folder. Inside were signed legal documents. Arthur underwent an independent competency evaluation. When these estate documents were executed, his physician found him competent. A second independent legal professional interviewed him without family present. The documents were separately witnessed. Mom's fingers tightened around her handbag. This is absurd, she muttered. Samuel turned another page. There's also something we need to clarify before continuing. He looked toward Vanessa. The $10 million Richard and Diane announced today is not part of Arthur Bennett's estate. Vanessa blinked. What? I looked from her to my parents. Samuel continued. The funds are held in an investment account controlled by Richard and Diane Bennett. They are legally entitled to distribute those funds as they choose. Dad's face tightened. Vanessa slowly turned toward him. Dad? Samuel's next words landed harder. Arthur did not leave Vanessa $10 million instead of Faith. Silence. The decision to give Vanessa that money and provide Faith with nothing equivalent was made by Richard and Diane. I stared at my father. Everything suddenly connected. The confident announcement, his claim that Grandpa knew, his speech about Grandpa trusting him with the family's financial future. He had let me believe the humiliation came from Grandpa too. So Grandpa never told you to cut me out? Dad leaned back. I never said those exact words. I almost couldn't believe it. Yes, you did. No. You asked whether Arthur knew how we intended to handle things. I said yes. And you knew exactly what I thought you meant. Dad's voice became defensive. I knew my father's values. I knew what he wanted for this family. Vanessa pushed her leather folder away. You told me Grandpa wanted this. Dad turned toward her. I told you your grandfather understood that different people require different forms of support. That's not what you said at home. Mom stepped in. Vanessa, this is not the time. Vanessa looked at her. When exactly is the time to find out the $10 million everyone just watched me receive was used to make Faith think Grandpa rejected her? Nobody answered. One of Grandpa's longtime financial advisors shifted uncomfortably. Dad noticed every pair of eyes on him. I made the decision I believed my father would have made, he said. Samuel closed the folder. Fortunately, Arthur documented the decision he actually made. Dad's expression changed again. Samuel turned toward me. Faith, your grandfather established a separate inheritance arrangement concerning you. My heart jumped. What arrangement? I'm required to disclose it in the order Arthur specified. Dad gave a short, humorless laugh. There. Of course he left her something. He looked around the room, trying to reclaim the confidence he'd had earlier. My father was sentimental about Faith. Maybe there's a personal account, some jewelry, one of the smaller properties. Mom nodded quickly. Whatever it is, Faith needs to understand that it doesn't change the structure of this family. I looked at her. The structure. Your father manages the family assets. That arrangement has worked for years. Samuel's eyes moved toward the document beside Grandpa's letter. I followed his gaze. Bennett Holdings voting control transfer. Dad noticed me looking. He leaned forward. Faith, don't start imagining things. Bennett Holdings is separate. I've spent decades building that company. Samuel looked up. Richard. Dad turned toward him. Samuel tapped the document once. You keep referring to Bennett Holdings as your company. He paused. Arthur's next instruction addresses that misunderstanding. Dad stopped smiling. Not gradually. 1 second he was leaning back in his chair, trying to convince everyone that whatever Grandpa had left me was sentimental and small. The next, his entire posture changed. Misunderstanding, he said. Samuel placed Grandpa's letter beside the corporate document. Yes. Dad leaned forward. I've managed Bennett Holdings for 23 years. No one is disputing that. Then choose your words carefully. Samuel looked directly at him. Managing something and owning it are not the same thing. The room went silent again. I knew Bennett Holdings was valuable. Everyone in our family did. Grandpa had built the company decades earlier and expanded it through investments, commercial real estate, and several operating businesses. Dad had eventually taken over daily management. But Grandpa had never surrendered his position as the largest voting shareholder. Until that moment, I had never considered why that distinction mattered. Dad clearly had. Samuel opened the document. Several months before his death, Arthur finalized instructions regarding his voting shares. Those instructions became effective upon his death. Dad extended his hand. I want to see them. You will receive the appropriate copies. Who authorized the transfer? Arthur did. Who approved it? Samuel's expression remained neutral. Arthur owned the shares, Richard. He didn't require your permission to decide what happened to them. Mum looked at Dad. Richard. He ignored her. Can it be reversed? No. That single word landed differently from everything else. Dad sat back. Samuel continued. The transfer became irrevocable upon Arthur's death. My pulse quickened. I looked at the document, then at the sealed papers still sitting in front of Samuel. Who did Grandpa transfer them to? Samuel glanced at me. I'll get there, Dad scoffed. This is theater. No, Samuel said. This is your father's estate plan. He lifted Grandpa's handwritten letter again. Arthur had left an explanation. Samuel read that Grandpa had watched Dad gradually begin treating management authority as personal ownership. What worried him even more was how money had started shaping our family relationships. Grandpa believed Dad had begun using financial support to reward agreement and withdrawal of support to punish resistance. I thought immediately about Mom's words in the hallway. Vanessa understands family, meaning Vanessa listened. Vanessa agreed. Vanessa didn't challenge Dad. Grandpa had seen it too. Samuel continued. Arthur had therefore separated the assets Dad and Mum personally controlled from the assets Arthur still owned. Dad could make whatever decisions he wanted with his own money. Grandpa would do the same with his. I looked down at my hands. Suddenly, memories I had never considered important began returning. Grandpa sitting across from me at a diner after a medical appointment. How much debt do you carry, Faith? I had laughed. What kind of grandpa that asks that over pancakes? The kind who wants an answer. Another afternoon, he had handed me a company financial statement. Tell me what you see. I see 40 pages of reasons I became a consultant instead of an accountant. He had laughed, then made me read it anyway. Another conversation came back. If someone paid every bill you had, would you stay somewhere you hated? No. Why? Because then they wouldn't be paying my bills. They'd be buying my choices. Grandpa had stared at me for several seconds before smiling. I had thought we were just talking. Now I wasn't sure. Those conversations hadn't been random. He had been watching how I thought. Maybe even testing me. Mom seemed to reach the same conclusion from a different direction. Samuel, stop. He lowered the letter. She stood. We need a private family discussion. No, I said. Mom looked at me sharply. Faith. I said no. This concerns assets that have been in our family for generations, and Grandpa left instructions for how he wanted them handled. Dad changed tactics immediately. His voice softened. Faith, your mother is right. I looked at him. If my father left you something significant, you need to understand the responsibility involved. Bennett Holdings isn't your consulting job. There are employees, contracts, investments. 10 minutes earlier, I had been independent enough to deserve nothing. Now suddenly I needed his guidance. He continued. Whatever your grandfather left you, experienced management needs to remain in control. There it was, the same power dynamic wearing different clothes. When Dad believed I had nothing, I could go earn my own. The second he suspected Grandpa had given me something valuable, he was already explaining why I shouldn't control it. I turned towards Samuel. Keep reading. Dad's jaw tightened. Faith, think carefully. I am. Samuel picked up the final set of papers. Arthur's remaining estate instructions concerned 3 principal categories. Everyone listened. First, his voting shares in Bennett Holdings. Dad stared straight ahead. Second, a protected investment trust. Mom slowly sat down. And third, 3 commercial properties Arthur owned personally, separate from Bennett Holdings. Vanessa looked at me. I looked at Samuel. Who gets them? Samuel turned a page. All 3 categories were assigned to the same beneficiary. Dad shook his head immediately. No, nobody had even said a name. Samuel looked at him. Dad pointed toward me. It cannot be her. Mom suddenly stood again. This time her chair nearly tipped backward. Stop. Samuel paused. Mom's face had gone pale. She looked directly at me. Faith and I need to speak privately before another word is read. Nobody moved. I stayed exactly where I was, and Samuel's finger remained on the line that contained the beneficiary's name. No. Mom stared at me. Faith, don't be childish. I'm not going anywhere. She looked around the conference room, suddenly aware that every person there was watching her. This is a family matter. I almost laughed. You made it a family matter when Dad announced Vanessa's $10 million in front of everyone. Dad leaned toward me. Faith, listen to your mother. No. My voice didn't rise. That seemed to bother them more. I looked at Samuel. Please finish reading. Samuel nodded. Mom remained standing for another second before slowly sitting down. Samuel looked at the final page. Arthur Bennett designated Faith Bennett as the beneficiary of all 3 categories. Vanessa inhaled sharply. Dad didn't move. I wasn't sure I had heard correctly. What? Samuel looked at me. Your grandfather left you his voting interest in Bennett Holdings. My father immediately interrupted. How much? Samuel turned toward him. 51%. Dad shot to his feet. That's impossible. Samuel didn't react. Arthur's 51% controlling voting interest transfers to Faith under the terms contained here. You're telling me she controls Bennett Holdings? I'm telling you Arthur transferred his controlling voting interest to her. Dad stared at me. 20 minutes earlier, he had told me to go earn my own money. Now he was looking at me like the chair beneath him had disappeared. Samuel wasn't finished. The second asset is Arthur's protected investment trust. Its most recent valuation is approximately $38 million. My mouth went dry. 38 million. Yes, Mom whispered. Arthur wouldn't do this. Samuel continued. The third portion consists of 3 income-producing commercial properties held personally by Arthur. I couldn't speak. Vanessa's $10 million was still sitting symbolically between us in that expensive folder. Except now the truth was undeniable. My parents had chosen to give Vanessa $10 million. Grandpa hadn't. They had publicly told me to earn my own money because they believed they controlled the financial outcome. Meanwhile, Grandpa had quietly left me control of the company my father had spent decades calling his, a $38 million trust and 3 commercial properties. Vanessa looked at Samuel. So I still get the 10 million. Samuel nodded. The money your parents promised you belongs to them. Their decision remains entirely separate from Arthur's estate. I looked at Vanessa. You should keep it. Dad turned toward me. That's not the issue. I finally looked at him. It was the issue when you thought I was getting nothing. His face hardened. This isn't funny, Faith. I'm not laughing. Samuel raised one hand. There is an additional explanation from Arthur. That silenced everyone. He picked up Grandpa's final letter. Arthur had deliberately kept the arrangement secret from my parents. He knew Dad was planning to give Vanessa $10 million. He also knew Dad had begun using my independence as an argument for why I should receive less. But Grandpa didn't confront him. Instead, he instructed Samuel to wait. He wanted Dad to make his decision freely. That was why Samuel had asked him to confirm it for the record. Grandpa wanted there to be no confusion later about who had chosen what. Dad had chosen Vanessa. Grandpa had chosen what he believed was responsible stewardship. Samuel began reading Grandpa's words. I did not make this decision because Faith is my favorite granddaughter. My eyes burned. I made it because responsibility without reward is how this family has repeatedly treated her, while dependence has too often been rewarded. Mom looked down. Samuel continued. Grandpa wrote that I had worked when I could have demanded family money. I had helped him without asking what I would receive when he died. And when I disagreed with him, I told him. That last part almost made me laugh through the tears. Grandpa and I had argued plenty. Once over dinner, he had told me I was stubborn. I told him I learned from him. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Samuel kept reading. A family company does not need another person who says yes, because saying no is uncomfortable. It needs someone capable of making a difficult decision without first asking who will be angry. I wiped my cheek. Then came Grandpa's final message to me. Wealth should give you choices, Faith. Never let it become your identity. That broke me. Not because of the $38 million, not because of the properties, not even because of Bennett Holdings. I cried because Grandpa had known. All those years when I wondered why my parents could celebrate Vanessa for needing them, but criticize me for standing alone. Grandpa had seen it. He hadn't abandoned me. Dad pushed away from the table. This is irresponsible. Samuel placed the letter down. Dad pointed toward me. She has never run Bennett Holdings. I know, Samuel said. She doesn't understand our operations. Arthur didn't appoint her chief executive. Dad paused. Samuel continued. He transferred voting control. Professional management can continue. I am professional management, and you can continue serving subject to the company's governance structure. Dad understood immediately. He no longer had unilateral control. Mom finally exploded. This is exactly what Arthur wanted. Everyone turned toward her. He wanted to divide this family. He knew Faith would use this against us. I stared at her. I haven't done anything. You will. Vanessa spoke before I could. Mom, stop. Mom whipped toward her. Excuse me? You're making this worse. I just gave you $10 million. Vanessa's expression changed. And that means what? I have to pretend Dad told the truth? Mom went silent. Vanessa pushed the leather folder farther away. You both told me Grandpa wanted this arrangement. He didn't. Dad grabbed his coat. This isn't finished. Samuel answered calmly. The estate documents are. Dad looked at him. We'll challenge them, and he did. Within weeks, Dad hired attorneys to contest Grandpa's estate plan. It went nowhere. Grandpa had prepared for that too. There were independent witnesses, medical competency records, Corporate resolutions, trust documents, clear ownership records. Everything had been completed while Grandpa was legally competent and without me present. I hadn't even known the documents existed. Dad couldn't credibly argue that I had manipulated Grandpa into anything. Once the legal challenge failed, I faced my first real decision. Everyone expected me to fire Dad. Even Vanessa asked. We were sitting in a quiet cafe when she said, after everything he did, you could remove him. I could. Are you going to? No. She looked surprised. Why? Because Grandpa didn't give me control so I could use it emotionally. Instead, I commissioned an independent governance review. The company's board examined how major decisions were approved. Dad remained involved because he genuinely had decades of experience. But one thing changed permanently. He could no longer authorize major transactions alone. Important decisions required proper board oversight. The company became less dependent on one person. And for the first time, Dad had to operate under the same accountability standards he had always expected everyone else to accept. The social fallout was harder for him. Extended family members eventually learned what had happened at the reading. Not every financial detail, but enough. They learned that Dad had presented Vanessa's $10 million as though it reflected Grandpa's wishes. They learned it didn't. People who once accepted Dad's version of every family dispute began asking questions. Mom hated that most. She could no longer call me ungrateful without someone asking what exactly I was supposed to be grateful for. Vanessa kept her $10 million. I never asked her to return a cent. It wasn't mine. Our relationship didn't magically become perfect either. One afternoon, she came to my apartment and said something I never expected. I knew they favored me. I looked at her. She swallowed. I just never asked why, because being favored was easier. That mattered more than an apology pretending the past hadn't happened. We're not fixing 20 years in one conversation, I told her. I know, but we can stop pretending. She nodded. That became our starting point. Months later, Dad asked me to meet privately in Grandpa's old office. He stood near the window. So this is it? He asked. You going to push me out eventually? I shook my head. If you do your job well and follow the same rules as everyone else, you have nothing to worry about. You really expect me to answer to you? No, I expect you to answer to the governance structure Grandpa established. He gave me a bitter smile.
You've changed.
No, Dad. You just never had to deal with me when you couldn't use money to end the conversation. He stared at me. I walked toward the door, then stopped. Grandpa didn't give me this company so I could become you. That was the last argument we ever had about ownership. I kept my consulting career while learning Bennett Holdings gradually. I hired advisors. I studied the company's financials. I asked questions when I didn't understand something instead of pretending an inheritance had magically made me an expert. The trust remained largely invested. The commercial properties kept producing income. Eventually, I used part of my distributions to create an employee education fund in Grandpa's name. But the biggest change had nothing to do with money. My parents could no longer threaten me with exclusion. There was nothing left they could withhold that I needed badly enough to surrender my choices. My relationship with them became limited, civil, bounded. If we were ever going to become a real family again, it would have to happen without money deciding who deserved love. Months after the will reading, I returned to Grandpa's office alone. Most of his personal things had been removed. There was only one framed photograph left on his desk. It showed Grandpa and me, years earlier, standing outside one of his first commercial buildings. I picked it up. Behind the frame was a folded piece of paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Grandpa had written one sentence: never confuse being given less with being worth less. I stood there for a long time. Then I folded the note carefully and placed it inside the desk drawer. My parents had given my sister $10 million and told me to go earn my own future. What they never understood was that Grandpa had been watching me do exactly that for years. And in the end, the greatest thing Grandpa left me wasn't the company, the properties, or the millions. It was proof that the independence my parents punished me for was the very reason he trusted me with everything he had built.